So chapter 397 of Hunter x Hunter has been released, and it is one of the most devastating, gutting, horrible, and yet, because of that, wonderful chapters of the series that I've read. Out of the nearly 400 chapters, this may be in my top 5, top 10 for sure. I don't know, this might be recency bias, but what I have just read is phenomenal. It has so many implications for the Phantom Troop, for the Spider, for why they do what they do, for Chrollo, so many new layers to implement for characters like Machi, Pakunoda, Uvo, and Chrollo himself, and as a result, the Spider. I am just in shock at the many different things that this chapter did, how it was presented, the atmosphere of the chapter, how it all came together, and you know, we were talking last chapter review about how we really hope, or I really hope, that Togashi's allowed to make it as dark as possible, and my goodness was he allowed to make this as dark as possible. Sarasa is gone, Sarasa is dead, and it was more brutal than any of us could have imagined. And yet, the brutality is not really in the subject matter, and, you know, let's be real, the subject matter is horrible. I'm gonna literally say what we saw in this chapter. We have a child cut up and sent to her family, her friends, with a note attached. We have that in this chapter, and yet the brutality is in the implication of that note, whatever was said on that note. How that implication caused Chrollo to spiral and flick a switch and switch up the way he wanted to live and change the complexion of his core characteristics into something completely darker and become what he needed to become to do what he needed to do. This was just amazing. I can't believe this. And I don't know if this is going to be the last chapter of this flashback. It very well could be. It definitely ended on a spot where I wouldn't be surprised if next chapter we went back to the present, but I'm sure we'll revisit this flashback, if not next chapter, in the future, because there are some details that really I feel need to be dwelt upon more, or will be dwelt upon more. Either way, this chapter in itself, I'm just going to stop gushing and get into it, but it was phenomenal. So we start and we get right into the thick of it, as there is a show that's about to be done by the Phantom Troop, or the Troop, the something Troop as they are right now, but they can't perform yet because Sarasa is missing. Everyone's extremely concerned, and notably, they all look to Chrollo immediately for what to do, the leader of the troop, the leader of this band, the one who they look to for guidance even at this young an age. Chrollo is deeply, deeply worried, and he chooses honesty as the best policy. He goes to the crowd in front of all of them in yet another panel that really reminds me of him, hands outstretched as a kid to the Meteor City horizon, and as well of the orchestra, conducting the orchestra. He talks to the crowd and says, "I'm sorry, we can't do the show because Sarasa's gone. We don't know where she is." And there's a lovely little detail as he's addressing the crowd where he is, you know, in his discomfort, in his worry, clutching at his shorts in discomfort, in panic, in worry, in anxiety, like, you know, how you see kids do as they're fidgeting around with things as they're nervous. Just people in general do this, but the childlike nature of this is just heartbreaking. But the crowd then say, you know, we'll help you. And Uvo is kind of the ringleader here. He gathers them all together in a way. They all come together and they go, okay, we'll ask the nannies, we'll ask people over here, we'll do this, let's plan this together, and we will find her. Uvo here is magnificent. He just tries to comfort Chrollo, going, don't worry about it, we'll find her. It's okay, she probably just fell and tripped somewhere and got hurt, but we'll find her, no worries at all. And it's hauntingly beautiful because of how they come together in this way, but also so sad because we know what happens here. And Chrollo, in response, is tearing up and crying. He's going, yeah, you're right, but he just looks so helpless and worried and horrified and heartbroken. But nonetheless, he believes in what Uvo's saying, or maybe he needs to convince himself. Either way, Finks gives Uvo and Chrollo his bike, and they go around searching. The rest of the Phantom Troop goes searching, and it's very atmospheric, very tense. It's just panic is going up and up and up as we see, you know, interlaced shots of Paku looking for her and calling out, Sheila, Finks, Franklin, and we see this really horrible shot of Finks looking very, very concerned. You know, Sarasa said last chapter, Finks is just a big softy. we see it here as he shows immense concern for her as he's looking for her. Eventually, Chrollo and Uvo reach this forest where the infamous tree was illustrated, and we get a little panel of the rain. We can almost hear it. We can hear the ambience here, and we get just this close-up panel of Chrollo looking on in horror. His eyes are whited over in shock, and we see this beautiful spread of the Phantom Troop. When I read it at first, I just kind of looked at it in awe as we see the members slowly make their way down into this clearing, this forest clearing, and the trees are drawn in such detail, and nailed to one of the trees is a note, and hanging from one of the branches is a bag. Also, I apologize that I can't show panels and spreads on screen. I know I can probably get away with it, but like I said in the past, I think in my 393 review, there has been one or two people who have gotten strikes for these chapter reviews. I'm just not going to risk it. Hopefully that's okay. At least not when the chapter's so fresh. But the troop understand what's going on. They're kind of in denial. Paku starts crying. Sheila starts, putting her arms around her. Uvo is horrified at this, and he just goes, someone's got to check. Please, we got to check. And Chrollo, bearing the burden on himself, says, I'll do it. I'll look. And it was mentioned in my chat that when the whole town got together and said, we'll look for her, and Chrollo was crying, it was mentioned, why exactly is he crying? Could be a number of things. Is it because he thinks that the worst will happen? Is it that he's emotional because these people are reaching out and helping him? Is he blaming himself and wondering, why am I worth this? Why are they helping me? Or is he lamenting his own weakness at being unable to do these things on his own? This person who's supposed to be this leader. That was posited to me, and I said, you know what, all of the above. I think it could easily just be all of those. And I think here he wants to bear that burden and compensate for that weakness, knowing what's going to happen, maybe, by saying, I'll look at whatever this is, knowing very well what it likely is. And he goes dead silent in front of this note. And Uvo says to Chrollo, because he can't read what's on this paper, Chrollo, who's well learned, who knows a bunch of languages, is able to read what's on the note, and he knows what they wrote. Uvo says, tell me what was on it, and Chrollo is refusing to answer him and just says, lower it, referring to the bag that's tied to one of the branches. They cut it off, and the bag falls into Chrollo's arms with a horrifying, gutting thud. And that loud noise, that's all the confirmation we need to know that our worst fears, their worst fears, have come to pass. And the rain falls down, and it's just painstaking as Chrollo opens this slowly. And Uvo makes his way over to him. Notably, Uvo throughout this chapter is dressed a lot like Gon. I don't imagine that is unintentional. We know Nobunaga drew parallels between the two. I think that's pretty cohesive as well. And Chrollo opens the bag, and we can see the remains, the chopped up remains of his dear sister. And his face in response to this is incredibly emotional, incredibly hard to look at. And it's drawn in a way that really, really is reminiscent of Gon in the Chimera Ant arc with Pito. It's drawn in a really similar way, very simple, thin lines. But the expression really strikes you. And the sadness is just so palpable and horrifying and well communicated and visceral. And not only this, but Sarasa also has a note pinned to her forehead. And the troop kind of converge and they realize what's going on. And Uvo continues asking Chrollo, what is on the note? Tell me what's on the note. What did they say? And Chrollo says, I won't tell you. And Uvo freaks out. He really wants to know what's on the note. And he goes, what did those murderous bastards say? What does this say? And Chrollo, he's grabbing Chrollo by the collar, and we get a zoom in on his eyes, and they are deadened, completely black. They look absent, totally full of darkness. Whatever he read in this note shocked him to his core, along with obviously the death, but something about this note has rattled him completely. And he says, I won't say it. I'll take those words to my grave. What was on this note? Whatever it was, completely, like I said, just changed him. Because, like I said in the last review, it would strain believability. I understand that Sarasa is so important to the rest of the crew. She represented a lot of their dreams, and her being taken from them shows that their dream is dead. It kind of enforces the idea of Meteor City being this dumping ground, this place that no one can ever hope for happiness for. They had these beautiful childhood dreams about being this troop that spreads this joy, and this has just been a proof that that is impossible. And so it's very meaningful for all these reasons. And so I think that the way that the troop responds to it would make sense. The way they go, the direction they go, complete 180 in terms of complexion. But to me, it felt like there needed to be a little something more to help us understand why Chrollo changed in the way he did. And we got those answers, and it is twofold. The first is right here, this note. Whatever was on it, it must have been the most horrifying thing ever. Some sort of statement about Meteor City or the people in Meteor City, or a heavily detailed description of what happened to Sarasa, what these people did to her. And I don't want to get into any specifics, but to make him react like that, I think that was definitely a part of it. Maybe there was also some other stuff on it as well, but I think at least to some extent, there is something to do with the nature of her death, and it is the worst thing you could imagine. And everyone reacts to this in their own different way. Chrollo, we just talked about him. Uvo lashes out. Machi is cradling Sarasa, cradling her, saying, we can't leave her here, it would be too sad. Paku is just crying, totally just inconsolable, and Sheila's hugging her, crying into her as well. And we get a little bit of a cut, and Sarasa is then, she's been embalmed, she's been repaired, and she is in this coffin, and she looks pristine, almost as if she was alive, which is a line that was said. The priest tells them this was done through something called embalming, through restoration, and we see this person, this figure, with long hair and a dark dress and a hat, as the rest of the crew are kind of smiling, remembering Sarasa, giving her gifts. Uvo has this tape, and he gives it a little kiss, and then puts it with her, lovingly. All this stuff is happening, but at the same time, Machi wants to talk to Renko-san, who is the person who restored Sarasa. And Machi, who really we saw her cradling Sarasa, not wanting her to be taken from them, wanting her to be whole. She looks at this art that was done by Renko-san and says, how can I do that? And she says, it's impossible. You can only do this with an ability I have. And then Machi says, does that ability have to do with the aura, the glow around your body? And Renko is surprised. So clearly Machi has awakened her Nen abilities. She may well be the first one in the troop. At the moment, I think she's the first confirmed one. And Renko says, those pretty eyes of yours make my skin crawl. As Machi just looks at her, simply, determined. And I love that this is the origin for Machi's Nen threads. Born from this compassion, this pain, and this awe at what Renko was able to do. And notably, I'm sure most will remember that when Hisoka was killed by Chrollo, killed, quote-unquote, she was ready to put his face back on post-mortem, or repair his face. So this is the core, this is the foundation for that sort of motivation. She found wonder and beauty in the ability to make those who have passed whole again. And there's more to it, the stuff I just mentioned before as well. There's lots of emotional basis for why she thought of this, as we would imagine there would be. But now it's defined and specific, and we know exactly how she became the way she became in terms of her power. And it's really beautiful. I think it elevates Machi quite a bit. Renko agrees to train her, and so this is how she gets where she gets. Then we get a scene with Chrollo and Uvo, who are walking by the graveyard, and Chrollo says, Uvo, give me 3 years. By then I'll be 14, so he's 11 right now. I'll have learned what I need to learn. I'll be able to sort everything out, and I'll be the man I need to be. We need a proper system for the city, and I need my own power. And Chrollo says, no, I don't want to wait. Waiting's pointless. He wants to do it now, impulsive as always, the enhancer he is, and he says, didn't you say you'd travel the world with me? And he says, 3 years won't change anything, and Chrollo says, yes, it will. He says, we're on the cusp of a huge leap in terms of technology and communication, and we can exploit this. He's talking about the age of the internet, the age of the interwebs. He foresaw this, being as knowledgeable as he is, picking up on what he's picked up throughout the years. It makes sense that he would know that this is coming. And so Uvo was like, what do you mean? Like, what's the point of, okay, what is your point? And Chrollo says, those who did what they did to Sarasa, they recorded what they did. And that line, you understand where he's going with it, so it's interesting in that way, but it's just so painful because it basically confirms that they told in that note what they did to Sarasa, and that they found it entertaining and artful enough to put on tape. And you immediately think of Chapter Black, Yu Yu Hakusho. Unbelievable. But he says they recorded what they did, and the crime scene was there to send a message. You saw the cigarette butts around there. There were people watching what was going on. My God, it's so horrifying. And they probably filmed it. And he says if these people heard of a way to showcase their art to the world, they wouldn't be able to resist. And so we can exploit that. Now, I do need to address this right away. Chrollo says here, a way to showcase their art to the world. These horrific deaths that can only be described as quote-unquote art, and the way that Chrollo says that makes me think that they said art, or something akin to it in the note. Who does that remind us of in the current arc? Seti Ednick. So is he connected to this? Is it a coincidence? Either way, it's impossible to not think of him in this moment with the way that Chrollo articulates this. But anyway, getting more into his plan, he says, yes, so there will be this communications blow up, but there will be regulations, things will be done to ensure that certain things are restricted. Now, we need to create loopholes. We need to create places where people can feel like they can share the most horrible, banned things that cannot be shared otherwise. So at the end of the day, what Chrollo wants to do here is he wants to create something akin to the dark web, and he believes that eventually these people will post on there, on the web they set for them, the trap they set for them, what they did to Sarasa, and they will know who did it, and they will be able to enact their revenge. And this is the origin of the spider. This is their web, and they lie on the outskirts, lie in wait, waiting for their prey to come in so they can strike. Born of this pain, of this loss of innocence, of this duty that has been thrust upon them by Chrollo, like this self-imposed duty from Chrollo. Now, who does that remind you of? There's some obvious parallels with Gon taking a lot of responsibility onto himself in Chimera Ant, but right away, who in the story has vowed to get back at the people who caused such pain for him, and despite it being so against his very nature, has slowly been drifting away and isolating himself to enact this duty for retribution to get justice for his clan. Kurapika and Chrollo, the parallels are unbelievable, and the fact that Kurapika is the way he is because of what the Phantom Troop did to them, the Phantom Troop did to others what was done to them themselves. They perpetuated this cycle of violence, and yet the root of it was above them, before them, and it's so beautifully disparaging of humans, of general society, of these cycles of violence and these horrible, horrible things that humans are capable of. That is the root. It continued with the troop, and the troop passed it on to the Kurta, and Chrollo has created someone who is on the same trajectory that he was on here. Now, will Kurapika go along that trajectory? We hope not. But Chrollo himself took it upon himself to do that, and we saw what he became. And now we get to the second element of why he became the way he became. Aside from Sarasa's death, that in itself was obviously devastating, but then there was the note, which shook him to his absolute core. And then there was also the decision he made to, quote-unquote, change himself, steel himself, become who he needed to become to enact this revenge. He resigned himself to losing all that he was to become what was necessary to do this. And the troop all agree, we will do whatever we can to do this as well. We need knowledge, we need tools, we need skills to get close to these killers. And notably, we see a panel of Sheila running away to become a hunter, to do whatever. You know, that's the last we see of Sheila in this chapter, and this, to me, indicates that there will be more about her, and I think more about the Kurtas in the future. But it's an interesting panel. But then Chrollo says himself, in order to make sure this never happens again, we will offer up our lives. We must resign ourselves to this. And so this is why I say, the troop did to Kurapika what was done to them. And they probably did that to lots of others. Now, they accept this burden. The moment they offered up their lives here to do what needed to be done in their eyes, they accepted this burden. And so this isn't a situation where they're going to have some sort of epiphany in seeing that they did this to Kurapika. No. They knew they were going to do this, they knew they were going to enact this pain onto others, and they accepted it, they were resigned to it. They took on the villain mantle. Chrollo straight up says it, after these years I will take many lives. But he says Sarasa wouldn't want that for us, and so, if I ever see her again, I will beg her for forgiveness. So haunting, I have goosebumps just talking about this. And someone in my Twitch chat actually brought this up with regards to this line, begging Sarasa for forgiveness. Here, He wants to, if he ever meets her again somehow, say, I'm sorry, but I had to do this. He is going against Sarasa's wishes here. Whereas in the middle of York New, he talks about appeasing the dead, appeasing Uvo, and saying, I will do as he would have wanted. Here he's going against what Sarasa wanted. In York New, he's doing what Uvo would have wanted. Now, that could just be due to their differing motivations as people at these different times in their lives. Sarasa never wanted to play the villain in this way. Sarasa didn't experience the death of a friend because that was her. So obviously there are lots of permutations and variables, but nonetheless, interesting comparison. And as Chrollo says, I will take many lives, Pakunoda notably looks horrified, saddened. She is losing the boy she cares so much for. What did she say in one of the previous chapters? I love you just the way you are, Chrollo. I love who you are. The implication being don't change. And he had to change. He had no other choice by his own ruling. And he says, I won't forgive those killers as long as I live. They won't repent for what they did, so we have to make them pay. And Chrollo says, I'll live the rest of my life as a villain and make others tremble with fear. We'll make it so that no one comes to this place again. Meteor City will be protected because of our reputation. And he asks very tenderly, in this declaration of war against everyone else, all those who would hurt them, he asks very tenderly, in this moment of painful, horrifying solace, he asks Uvo, will you be the leader with me? And Uvo looks down at him with such sensitive eyes, with such tenderness, and he says, no, you are the leader, you are our leader, and with you as the head, we will follow you, I will follow you, until the end. And all the members put their finger in the air as they declare the formation of the Phantom Troop in earnest. I stopped and stared at this page for I don't know how long. I was in complete awe. There were tears. There was shock. This is just transcendent writing. This is the origin. And we see the election of the leader in this moment. And Chrollo looks maybe a little bit intimidated and a little bit worried, and the occasion and pressure seems to get to him a little bit, but nonetheless, still in that expression there is determination. And we have an immediate cut to 3 years later, and we see that the Phantom Troop has grown. Chrollo has grown completely in appearance and the way, just his overall expression. He's hardened himself. He's become, in large part, the Chrollo we know. And this is the flashback that Pakunoda saw when thinking about the laws he laid down for the philosophy of the spider. At that time, where members said, is that really Chrollo? And this is our time jump, as we see what he told them all. Notably, Finks isn't there. Could have been late, not sure. Sheila isn't there either. And then it said, thus they were reborn as the spider. And notably, they're on a broken stage, symbolizing their dreams, their hopes, what they did, their place of joy, crumbling underneath them as the platform for their hatred and their lashing out at the world. And Chrollo here accepts this burden himself, as Kurapika accepts his burden, and Chrollo becomes broken by it. And it was also posited to me in chat that simply just sifting through the dark webs to find Sarasa's killers, it does things to a person. It no doubt will have changed Chrollo. It no doubt would have contributed to his overall demeanor. That is definitely something that was a factor here, I think, or will be a factor as well. And so they form this, but in order to get closer and closer to their goal, they naturally have to do worse and worse things to create this fear, to create this reputation around Meteor City, to get what they need to get. And that's very similar to how Kurapika drowns himself and gets further and further from what he really wants in life for the sake of this duty. This event changed them forever. And it told them that Meteor City was never going to be protected unless they acted out first. And it makes me think about what Fink said in the Chimera Ant interlude for the spiders. The elders they always lose sight of what's important. This is what's important to them. And then for Chrollo, there's more to it. The note, taking this burden upon himself, the duty here being more important than anything in the world, his identity being projected onto it because he loses his sense of self and loses track of who he is. Perhaps in his journey to becoming this villain, he lost complete sight of who he is, because this villain is so opposite from what he was as a child, from who he was. So naturally, there would be this discrepancy, there would be this confusion. it could break a person psychologically, and I think it did. Now, will he find himself at the end of this arc in the blood and devastation, remembering who he was through loss? I'm not sure. But the potential here, unbelievable. And the chapter ends here, but you think about what Nobunaga said to trigger the flashback. He says, "We were just fumbling in the dark, searching for something, anything. And most of all, resignation and anger were the driving force. Am I right?" So the driving force has been established. It was Sarasa's death. But he was talking, that was in response to something Fink said about how they never wanted to just destroy the world. Now, there are differences in the translation here, but I think that, personally, the way I interpret it, is that this could be equivalent to them trying to destroy the world, maybe, or it could be before they wanted to destroy the world, because there's still, 13 years or something from the end of this chapter to where we are now. 12, 13 years, something like that. So does something else happen to force them to mature, or do they slowly do so? Do they slowly sort of stumble into understanding what they really want to do and stop being mindless? Because what Nobunaga specified was that we once were aimless. We once had destruction for no reason, just stumbling around in our pain. Is that what they were here? And if so, how does that change? Or have they already changed here? I think there are different ways you could look at it. I tend to lean on the former, I think. But now this brings up so many details, like what was in that tape, firstly? What happened in these 3 years? Was it moderating the dark webs? Was it Chrollo having to delve into that role and losing himself as a result? I would bet on maybe both. I also want to know what Sheela's off to do, because Sheela has some role in the Courta stuff. So what's going on with that too? There are so many different directions that this could go in, because there are still so many gaps that need to be filled. Like I said, Sheela, the 3-year gap here. What was on the note? The Courta stuff, how does it connect to this? Seti, maybe? Then people also have that theory about Sheela being Periston. I haven't looked into it much, so I don't have much to comment about it at the moment, but I do plan to research it pretty soon to see what I think about it. At the moment, that does sound a little far-fetched, but I'm not going to conclude that or anything. I'll wait to see what people have been cooking. And then there are implications for what this could have on the troop members. Antagonist from my chat talked about Phaeton's pain packer, Unforgiven, how it could be this embodiment and internalization of all the pain he's experienced just unleashed on the world. Shalnark, how you can manipulate enemies, that could be like a streamlined purpose or a streamlined way of their ultimate goal. Like, a lot of those things, you can theorize that they have a lot more basis in the origin that we know about them now. But what really sticks out to me is just the whole moment, the moment where Chrollo is elected as this member, the moment where he finds Sarasa and their lives are forever changed, and how he literally takes it upon himself to become this villain, and in so doing, switch his identity around and losing himself in the process, losing all sense of what it means to be human in order to achieve what he needs to achieve. I was talking with my friend Andres about this, and he said, a really great analogy. I've been talking about Chrollo as a chameleon in videos, in streams, about how his identity is so empty that he takes on the powers in the present of others. That is his Nen power, right? We talked about that. And then how he's able to embody so many roles. He's a chameleon in that way, without a central core. And the complexion changed, but he was always like that. And so it was said to me that in trying to become this villain, Chrollo has likely forgotten his original color. His color was far too dark, and he can't remember his original color. And now he is this embodiment of this loss of identity, this pain, this loss of innocence that led to these cycles of destruction and bloodshed and pain that continue and are perpetuated throughout history into the present, as the Phantom Troop continue to embody this childhood innocence lost and this pain through enacting that very same pain on others, like Kurapika. It is so poetic, it is so rich, and it embodies so many things about what Togashi thinks about humanity and society at the moment, and these very misanthropic things. And it was wonderful. This was one of the most unbelievable things I've ever experienced in any manga. This is my favorite antagonistic group. I love them to death before this flashback, and now they've been elevated so much. Chrollo, what a character. I'm currently making a video ranking my top 15 Hunter x Hunter characters. I'm gonna have to change something around for that. Either way, I think I'm gonna leave it there. thank you so much for joining me. If you'd like to read these chapters live with me, I do so every Friday, at least for as long as the chapters are being released. It's always lots of fun, it's always very insightful, it's been great lately. Thank you so much for watching. Please share your theories about this. I've talked about a few questions that I really want answered, and I don't think this flashback is done. I could see it going back to the present after this with the way this ended, as it says, like, thus they were born like this, or reborn. I could see them going back to the present here, but just because of Sheila, just because of all these gaps, I do think that there will be more. More dwelt upon, more about the troop. Even if it's just tiny little flashbacks, I think there will be more. Maybe it'll be later in the arc and not next chapter, but I do think there will be more. But yes, please share any of your theories that you might have. Comment on this chapter. Did you like it as much as me? Do you think it was one of the best in the series? I sure as hell do. And thank you so much for watching yet again. I hope to continue to be able to do these, and yeah, that's all I got for today, guys. Many thanks for watching, and like I said, please feel free to share your thoughts. Thanks, guys.